It's a pleasure to be here. Get to be at my stage in life. It's a pleasure to be anywhere. But hopefully, as you go through this journey together today, we'll have some experiences that'll be meaningful for you. I think we're all learning that there's this whole changing faces of our aesthetic practices. As you see people from all over the world, Arthur is in the east part of Canada, I'm in the west part. I live in Nowheresville, Calgary, Alberta, which has 1 million plus people. I see patients from all over the world. And if I can do what I'm going to show you in my town, you can do it in your city. So if you look at these changing faces, our aim of this whole voyage today is to go away with new eyes that you sort of see quite a bit different. As Arthur would emphasize, we look with our brains, but we actually see with our eye. We look with our eyes, but we see with our brains. And sometimes seeing things where you have these aha moments. I teach a lot in my clinic, and I have a lot of doctors leave and say, I had some of my first aha moments by seeing what you do with your patients. But if we look, this connection we have between the U.S. and Canada is pretty strong. You'll see the Canadian guy here has a bare hand, and the U.S. Physicians are a little wimpy, so they have to wear gloves. So we hopefully, aesthetic clues when you're seeing patients. I'm going to talk to you about the consult. Because I have a lot of physicians say, well, I can't do what you do with your patients, and it's all because of the consult. So if you look at the consult of the clues that you're seeing patients, when you enter that room, and you understand that it's like a little bit like these fish in a fish bowl. They don't even know they've got water. They don't even see the water. They don't even feel the water. So unless you connect and engage with the patient, then you're not really doing the consult. If you look at these girls that are repairing this fishing net, you think your job is tedious. Your main job as a consultant aesthetic physician is to find the real reason why patient X, why Diana wants to look better. Because I can tell you from pursuing this for many years, the real reason has nothing to do with the stated reason. And when you explore the real reason, you always have an emotional moment. And that is the driving force behind why patients want to do what they do. So as Arthur's alluded to, we have this whole changing faces of our patients that we see from all over the world. Like your town, your city, my city is a melting pot of patients from all over the world. So if you look at the world clock this morning, which I did on my computer, there is 7,369 billion people on the planet. It increases by about 250,000 people every day, a net of about 155,000 people a day. And every set of genetics is different. So if you look at our sort of whole concept now, I have Nexus in Canada, so when we go through security, it's your iris with the picture taken so they can identify you. So fingerprints aren't very reliable, photos aren't very reliable, but this whole recognition system of how we recognize people, the new 3D cameras we're working with all work with the facial recognition system. So if you look at, this is all in National Geographic recently. This is Lawrence, Mackenzie, and Allison here. And these faces are totally different. The changing faces are amazing. Here, this girl on your left there, she's part Filipino, Chinese, Spanish, Indian, Hungarian, and German. And he's part Japanese and Ukrainian. I pursue, with all my patients, what is their genetics? What we're trying to do, as Arthur hinted at, is we're trying to create biomimicry. We're trying to mimic what that patient's best features are and reproduce them and make them look their best, not trying to create somebody else. So if we look at this whole world that we're in with our aesthetic world, with all the things that we do, we've learned that one size fits none from all these things. I'm a blepharoplasty guy. We had to do a record recently. I've done a little over 10,000 blepharoplasties in the last 20 years. And I often will inject 100 syringes a day with fillers. And those fillers have to fit in with your practice, and they have to fit in really well. So we've really learned that we don't see ourselves at all except in a mirror or in a photograph, unless you're an identical twin. And then you've seen yourself. But this whole concept of even in, as this girl shows here, even in the 12th century, no self-respecting woman left her home without a mirror to look at herself. The challenge is that we don't see ourselves as others see us. We have this perception problem. So patients, our biggest challenge in aesthetic practice is selective focus. Patients come in, all they see is their nasolabial folds. They see something that they don't particularly like, and you have to change that focus by being fairly assertive in your approach to your patients. But you can't do that until you've connected and engaged with them. So getting that perception from reality to reality is sometimes the most difficult step. So some of our patients have anorexia, some have anorexia, and some have nanorexia. They just see themselves quite different than we see themselves. So that perception sometimes is a big issue. So with this whole thing that's happening, every North American woman is expected to have Caucasian blue eyes, full Spanish lips, a Caucasian classic button nose, hairless Asian skin, California tan, Jamaican dance hall butt, long Swedish legs, small Japanese feet, the abs of a fitness instructor, the hips of a 9-year-old boy, arms of Michelle Obama, and a Barbie doll chest. Well, this doesn't exist. So we have to be able to come to reality. Now, Florence Colgate, and I think Arthur showed this girl's picture. She was voted the most beautiful girl in England 3 years ago, and it caused quite a stir because mathematically she's fairly perfect. And as Arthur also talked about, we, as the general public, feel that it should be the eye of the beholder, and it's really not. It's in the thigh of the beholder. So what we've been trying to teach for quite a while, I draw and paint. I spend a lot of my midnight hours drawing and painting. And so I did not use the phi caliper golden ratio for quite a while. And Arthur is the one that would measure my faces that I've done and said, "Oh, you're really right on." And so I wanted to be more than right on. So I started with, Arthur's the one that got me started measuring. Now I measure everybody. I measure my dog. I measure my horse. I measure everything. And it's becoming very much part of my practice is this whole concept of the right brain math and what you do. But if you look at our patients are all about genetics are all about biology, biology is about physiology, physiology is about physics. And physics is all about mathematics. So that's why we keep talking about this whole concept of math. And you would not, although I saw some here today that maybe looked like the guy on the right, but you would not consider having most things you do with your clothing actually fit well. And so with faces, one size fits none. So you have to realize that you still have to measure. But we are essentially, turn it up a bit. There, Stan. Just turn that sound up a bit. So women usually focus on their eyes and their lips, and men usually focus on their eyes and lips. But men usually focus on spots. They don't usually look at their face. And men are very, very impulsive. I'm not going to talk a lot about men today, but I spend a lot of time with my male practice. I have quite a male practice. We'll talk more about feminizing women. But patients are not paying for cost. They're paying for results. And Arthur alluded to this a little bit, so there is something to do with the results. But most patients are on a budget, but a lot of my patients aren't on budgets. Once you get that emotional moment of what they really want to do and why they want to do it, then often the cost disappears a little bit. But we are essentially image enhancers. I spend a lot of time trying to find positive things about the patient. Sometimes that's very difficult. I usually ask them to show me things that are positive about their face, because we want to enhance those, but we also want to diminish those things that are not so great. So the self-esteem, we're really image enhancers. We're trying to create better youth in our patients. So the three things I really focus on, we've had this big emergence now of physiognomy, which has been an interest many years ago. Now it's this whole history now back of trying to understand about physiognomy and personality of the patient and phenomenology. And I'll just introduce those things a little bit briefly, because I spend a lot of time with my consults. I have 5 nurses. My nurses are assigned each patient comes in, and sometimes personality of Mary doesn't match with Carmen, my nurse, so we switch around a little bit so we can match those personalities. That whole personality of the patient, you have to mesh with that and understand that a little bit. And as Anne Rand from Atlas Shrugged said many years ago, there's nothing as significant as a human face. And as Arthur pointed out, in milliseconds you can tell whether a face is pleasant or not, or beautiful or not. So that whole physiognomy of figuring out faces is the ability, in phenomenology, it's the ability to step back from that patient a little bit. Not necessarily step out of the room, but step back and look and see what you've actually seen and see what you think that patient needs to have done. And usually you can tell, as a dermatologist, you can tell port wine stain or herpes zoster in milliseconds. But with the aesthetic medicine, that's why derms often make such terrible aesthetic physicians. They're so used to being an hour behind, and they're so used to not focusing on the details. But there is more to vision than meets the eye. Vision has a little bit of importance, but understanding the patient and all these 9 senses, not just the 5, 6 senses, but understanding that. So if you look at what that patient sees, because every patient has their own perception, so that's why the consult becomes so important. And how they see their world is where you have to really understand that and focus on that patient much different than you would normally. And once you connect that and see what the patient sees, because we see different and the patient sees things different. So you have to be able to connect those two a little bit. And you have to be what I call Sherlock Holmesing. My staff are always amazed at how I can know very intuitively exactly what that patient does, what their interests are. A lot about that patient, it's almost spooky. It's because I've spent a lifetime studying patients. So you pay attention. It's not that I'm smarter, I'm just paying attention. And focus on the positive things and plan ahead how you're going to hide the things that are just annoying. Hide the things that you just don't like about that patient as far as their physical needs. And not take them away, but just hide them a little bit. So those aesthetic clues are there. And these are all patients of mine. They all have issues. And that's that whole physiognomy of studying faces. This girl is a cosmetic junkie. We all have them. She's had a facelift. She's upper bluff, lower bluff. She's had cheek implants. She's had implants put in her lips. She's had too much Botox and had dissolved all her temporalis muscle. She's had the tattooing. So I've got this girl now back where you'd hardly even recognize her. She now looks like she did when she was practically 30. This girl is part Cree and part Blackfoot, and has spent $30,000 the last 2 years, had a facelift in Las Vegas. She's had all kinds of stuff done. And you look at her and judge her, you'd say she's not interested in aesthetics at all. So all these patients they don't have a barcode or a QR code. You have to discover all these things yourself about what's important. So if we look, as I said before, sometimes it's hard to find anything to compliment them about, but as Coco Chanel said, a woman with pretty shoes is never ugly. So you can find things that are very nice about patients, and usually it's not just their shoes. So as patients, I try to even know the name of their dog and their cat. Literally. That sounds humorous, but I really do. I understand exactly what that patient's interests are and what they're doing. And it's not, patients that do aesthetics in my clinic, it's not the size of their wallet or their amount of their testosterone or hormone level, it's their wiring. And I focus on the patients that are wired. It's like the old Bible salesman that's rejected at the door. You just go to the next patient. You just go to the next door, and you find you'll focus on patients that have a budget and patients that are interested in aesthetics. So some patients are wired for it and some are not. It has nothing to do with how they look. I have some of the most beautiful patients that I know just are not wired for aesthetics. Like Stephen Jobs, he hardly showered. He was just not interested in aesthetics. So if you look at, I was on the beach in Puerto Vallarta a little while ago, a couple of years ago, and watched these fishermen. And these are kites. They're like a hawk, and they focus over where the fish are. So the fisherman throws his net where the fish are. So you have to. It's like I'm a fly fisherman. So when we teach fly fishing and you talk about fly fishing, you focus on where the fish are. So what we really try to do in restorations is restore what the patient had. I have patients every day say, "Oh, I want to age gracefully," what means you grow old and look it. And that's usually a 30-year-old that says, "I want to grow old gracefully." So what we try to teach our patients is you mature gracefully by meaning restoration and maintenance. So we teach our patients that maintenance is where it's at. Now, Arthur and I started this about 2003, this whole concept of maybe our aesthetic rules need to be changed a bit, because the old aesthetic rule was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So what we recommended you look at your own way you're doing things and look at it, and maybe if it ain't broke, break it and make it better. Because if we keep doing what you're doing, you'll keep getting what you've got. And change is so difficult because of lots of different reasons. But you can confuse activity with accomplishment and not get very far. Now, I teach my patients that aging and getting older is not a choice, but looking younger is a choice. And doing nothing is also a choice. If you look at Brigitte Bardot, most of you don't remember her, but she was a bombshell. And now she's in her 80s. She's quite annoying, actually. But she's never done any maintenance to speak of, but her lips were amazing. Her face was amazing. So she had and not all of our patients have this genetic gift. Most of our patients have not won the genetic lottery. So if they haven't won the lottery, then you have to help them a little bit. But this is like your clinic. My clinic's the same way. You have patients that are skeptical, suspicious, wariness, or qualms, or disbelief. You have to peel off the onion, literally. They're leery, tentative, intimidated, apprehensive, cool, aloof, indifferent. You keep peeling that onion off, and then you get to the patient, and then you get to somebody that you can really deal with. So if you look at the study, this is Valana, and Valana was a former Hudson's Bay model. It's like Macy's. It's a big department store in Canada. So now she's 72 and she wants to look better, and there's a number of reasons why she wants to look better that are fairly personal that I found out by just delving into her life. I give all my patients one assignment, and they have to do it. It's a must. My nurses help them with this. They bring in a photo when they're in their 20s. Usually a good resolution photo is when they graduated from something or got married. So here she's in her 20s as a model, and she's beautiful. And she's a very pretty, smart, delightful lady now. But if you start looking at all your photos of your patients and start looking at your patients, you'll realize that your lips, they have this phi reversal. The upper lip often stays a little fuller than the bottom one. So I spend a lot of time every day with patients trying to get this balance back. As Arthur hinted, each side of the face are not twins, they're siblings. We try to get harmony and balance and proportion, but not perfect symmetry. But lips, you want to have fairly perfect balance and symmetry. So we spend a lot of time. I do this split face concept with a lot of my patients. I say, okay, here we're at. This is very helpful for patients to get away from the selective focus, because even your high school dropouts can tell they need to look at their whole face. It really is helpful to do this. And if you want to learn how to do this, I'll give you the steps and how to do these split faces. It's a little tricky, but it can be done quite easily. So you can see this reversal. She needs not just her lips, but her whole face addressed. And I'll show you her picture when we do the feminizing talk here later this morning, or today sometime, whenever it is. But if we look at lips, lips are a huge interest. We have lots of products for lips. Lips are the easiest things done poorly. And if we understand the whole concept of lips, you get that fuller upper lip about age 16, about 18 for lower lip, and from then on, it's a slow leak. So then you start losing volume, and this is this patient at 72 that I need to do some work with, and this is her when she's 18. So you can see that leak has happened over a period of 54 years. So this is Susan. So Susan has lots of little issues. First of all, she's not won the genetic lottery. She's a smoker, lots of sun damage, and she's actually the younger sister, but everybody thinks she's the older sister. So we need to start on her today. So her husband died 3 years ago from a malignancy, and she wants to get married again. Her new boyfriend is younger, and he's actually quite annoying too. I've met him. So actually, he's no longer her boyfriend. So if we look at her, it's like an art project. It's like restoring a painting. So if you've ever restored anything, sometimes you say, well, where do I start? So getting started with a patient like this sometimes is a little difficult. So we'll go through Susan in quite detail of what we've done with her and show you, because it's a typical patient. Now, this girl did win the genetic lottery. She's a typical quadragenarian. She's typical of my patients. Some are quinquagenarians, which are 50 to 60, but she's typical of 40 to 50. That's about 80% of my patients, this age group. And typical of patients like this that was a former model says she doesn't know what's happening. She just says, why don't I get the comments that I used to get of how good I look? So I used to get all these comments of how great I look. I stopped getting those comments. She's a very smart girl. She's had her own business. She's got 2 kids. Her youngest is 4. And she wants to look better. So she's got lots of little subtle issues that can be done. So just turn that up a bit.
But the measurement is between the intercanthal.
So Arthur taught me all this.
And that distance stays the same. So the intercanthal distance here.
This is actually a live on thing. We just videoed it.
That measurement is 1. And that should be from the medial canthus to the peak of the brow, be where the peak of the brow is on both sides. And the same on this side. Her peak of her brow is subtle, but it is right at where it should be. And then the distance, the actual width of the brow should be 1.618 equivalent. And then the brow position for the most feminine look is the head of the brow to be lined up with the inner canthus. And in her case, the left one's fine. This one's off about 1.5 millimeters, 2 millimeters. So it just makes her bridge of her nose and this glabella area up here just a little bit wide. And in the ideal perfect face, the brow matches this width. In her case, the her forehead's a little bit high. So she's got a high forehead. So I can tell you that most patients intuitively know that. So do you wear your hair up or down?
Down.
Yeah, she knows that it just looks better. You'll see people with this hair all back, and your eye just doesn't like it. So she's learned that intuitively. The length of the nose should be this distance as well. The width of the lips, this distance. The width of the chin. And the apex of the cheek, which we're going to talk more about, and she has a beautiful apex, is phi as well, from the corner of the inner canthus. So those measurements are very important.
Okay, this is Erin. And Erin is a quinquagenarian. She's 50 to 60, and lots of personal reasons why she wants to look better. And if you can see, she has the submandibular gland that's a salivary gland that's hanging down too. And if you start looking for those, you'll see almost every patient you see over 45, 48 has this. It's a common problem, especially if facelift patients. It causes that submandibular gland to prolapse and hang down. So she's got great genetics, but she's got lots of little issues. She's deflated in the middle of her face, and as Arthur is pointing it out, she's retruded. She deflated in that central face because of the malar fat pad is sunk down and the muscles have relaxed. The soft tissue has become softer and it's deflated. So our whole job is not to inflate, but to reflate and contour. And I'll show her in detail as well. But if you look at the structure underneath, this malar fat pad is softened and relaxed and hangs down a little bit, forces the nasolabial fold to become obvious. She's lost the reflection of the light. Now, you can't have shadows without light, and you can't have highlights without shadows. So this is really critical, how you reflate and restore the cheek. We had that big issue with a product that was released in the U.S. 2 years ago where the cheeks were injected, the whole cheeks were inflated instead of reflated. They couldn't use those photos. So it was because of failure to understand the math of the face. So we'll talk about this girl more just when we introduce her. So here's Shauna. Now, as we'll talk in my photo section, there is a whole concept of psychophotology. Psychophotology is 4 groups of people when you take their photos. Some are just amazing. You take their photo, they just know exactly what to do. This girl is a former model, but she's a fashion model, not a glamour model. So she does not photograph well at all. She poses. So Shauna is beautiful. She lives with her mother. She's got a 10-year-old child. She's got lots of little difficulties. Her husband is also annoying. And so she has a number of issues here. She wants to keep that dimple in her chin. She's got a crooked nose. Her eyebrows are flat. She's got temporal hollowing. She's got lots of little things that you can immediately see that need to be addressed and dealt with. Now, Lori, interesting girl. I'm surprised she got married because she's got OCD so bad. So she's an OCD girl that's got lots of little issues. She's got chin deflation, the dimpling you see that normally we used to use started in 1990 with Botox for all these things when we started using Botox. And then other neuromodulators. So she's got little subtle things. She's deflated in the middle of her face. She's got lots of little things you can address. And we'll get to those as we start and seeing that same issue with the fat pad and with her central deflation. Now, this girl is more challenging. She's in her 60s. She's a sexagenarian and had a facelift when she was 39. She lived in California. She lives in Canada now. She was Elizabeth Taylor stand-in, not stand-in for some parts that were done. She looked like Elizabeth Taylor. I've got her whole portfolio copied. It's amazing. So she's got major issues. So to create this whole deflation problem is difficult to correct, but can be done without surgery. So I did a lot of work with this girl with reflation and contouring with neuromodulators and fillers. And that shadow there that you can just barely see is that cheek form shadow you should not fill. Now, another one of my patients that's a quadragenarian, she just turned 51 here a couple of weeks ago. So this is Tamara, former model, non-smoker, stays out of the sun, good hygiene, good diet. She's I'm probably her biggest fan. She's amazing. So with her, she just needs a little subtle things to make her look better. And mathematically, that intracanthal distance, as Arthur has taught us, stays the same from 19 to 90. So it's that one measurement that you can take. You can also use it for photographs to tell whether the photographs are the same size, because that doesn't change. So if you look at what we did, we just reflated and contoured a bit, dropped her brows a little bit. You don't raise everybody's brows. You shape them. So Arthur and I started in 2003 saying, why are we trying to raise everybody's brows? Why are we trying to do neuromodulators just on brows? Why don't we start using fillers? So we started using fillers, years ago. So then the last few years we use cannulas now rather than needles. That makes a huge difference in the shape. But this girl, I hardly do anything to her. So it has to do with collagen, elastin stimulation, all those factors that deal with HA fillers. And this photograph is like 6 years since her first treatment session. So maintenance on her is minimal. So once you get these patients, once you get the painting restored, then the maintenance is minimal. That's what I want to talk a fair amount about. So with this mathematical process, it is not left brain math. I don't take these measurements, these calipers out of my out of my pocket. They stay with me. My nurses use them. They draw on faces as well. We draw on all of our patients. And if you look at this girl's, all of her gymnastics here, what we've done, we've actually lowered her eyebrows a little bit. She just looks better. So you're actually shaping brows. You predetermine by measurement where the peak of the brow is, and then you can actually create that peak again and make a big difference. So if you measure these all out, we actually do these on patients' photos. We do them on their actual faces as well, and it can be helpful for the patient. Patients love this because nobody else does it, so it sets you apart from other clinics that are the Walmart down the street. And once you start understanding this, it took me a long time to try to avoid injecting the lower lip too full. So if you look at beautiful lips, that lower lip, maximum volume should be the intracanthal distance. And that intracanthal distance is really important. If you look at photographs of women that were beautiful over the many years of any culture, it matches that intracanthal distance. Now, in Caucasians, as Arthur has taught us for years, it's that 1 to 1.618. But in skin of color, it's a little different that we'll talk about. It's more 1 to 1. But the intercanthal distance, so what I do with brows, I measure that distance first, then I determine exactly where the peak is. I have my nurses draw a little pen line right above the actual hair of the brow so I can know right where that is. And then we flip that over to determine the width of the brow, the length of the brow. A lot of times patients don't have their brow shapes right. And so we have our, and I should have been a makeup artist actually. I have a makeup artist that works in our clinic. Is send them to a brow girl. And it's one of the best things to do is have the best brow shaper gal in your neighborhood, in your city, come to your clinic, which I've done several times. Come to my clinic, spend a day, and try to show them what we're trying to accomplish. Now, as Arthur said, you can't change the forehead height, but you can make sure to contour it. I use cannulas mostly on foreheads, but you can talk about hairstyle and getting that patient to have the right hairstyle for their face. Now, you can change the length of the nose by where you inject with the radix. The radix is that soft part that you inject. And you can actually change the length of it by where you inject it. You can change the width of it as well by where you inject your fillers. But all these things, you can determine where the apex is of the cheek by several different methods. We'll show you as we draw on faces today. And these are all in your syllabus as well. And drawing these out becomes very important. Now, Asian faces are very, skin of color patients are very important to understand as well, because there's some difference in their phi measurements. This girl is from the Philippines. You should be able to tell that instantly. She's a former nurse of mine. And when she was 19, ran for Miss Philippines, who was absolutely stunning. So over the time, her face changed. She's, look at her and you say, okay, she's a teeth grinder, which she is. And she has some little subtle things. But the ideal shape of faces is oval. And that's the oval face, as we've been emphasizing over and over. That oval face is beautiful. So with nasal facial relationship, and Arthur's been teaching this for years as well, we think all these things you have to think. The golden ratio, because the nose has a lot to do with the rest of the face. And if you can change the nose a little bit, you can change the whole face. So where you inject makes a big difference to that face and how you can lengthen it. And this is in your syllabus as well, all about the radix. I don't need to repeat all this. So it's in there. So when I spend a lot of time daily, most of my patients that I inject with their noses and temporal hollowing, masseters, parotid shrinking, submandibular glands, all these things are serendipitously. So patients don't come for those things. They just happen that they're there, and you just take charge of what you're doing, and those things are treated while the patient's there. So there's discussion, but very little discussion. It's just part of their project. And their photos are all taken, and they're transferred to all my monitors. I have 27-inch monitors in my rooms, and so I can have those photos right in the clinic there. So that whole curvy linear line has to look beautiful, and that dorsal aesthetic lines that rhinoplasty physicians focus on so much has to be in balance. And this is what we treat a lot. And Arthur taught me how to do this quite a long time ago. And I probably treat 8 or 10 patients a day with raising their nasolabial angle. It's one of the most dramatic things with the least amount of product. How much do you usually use, Arthur, on that?
0.1, 0.2.
Yeah, I usually use 0.1 to 0.2 max. So that angle is such an important thing. So if you look at this whole connection with us, with the skin of color, it becomes very important understanding the difference in the noses. There's 4 major differences. The nasal bridge is lower, the nostrils are wider, the nasal tip has a little fatty tissue, it makes it a little bit different, and the nasolabial angle is a little bit lower. So if you go back to Desiree here, what we did with this girl is you make that nose narrower, then you make that face look more oval. You shrink her masseters down, and after you shrink those masseters down, and Arthur's been studying this as well as Waffles Woo, right, Arthur? With chronic reduction of the masseter, because the masseter muscle, which has 2 components, superficial and deep, and we'll talk about that later too, how important that is to get the deeper, otherwise you herniate the deeper through and you have that walnut sticking out when you chew. So if you constantly contract it, then you stimulate bone, you stimulate the osteoblasts, and you get this prominent mandibular angle. And as you reduce it over years, which has happened in this girl, then you actually get bony remodeling. It's quite amazing if you look at your photos and follow them. So if you narrow this a little bit and lengthen her nose, because her nose aesthetically was just a little bit too short. So I just lengthened it by where I put my filler in the radix area there. And then as you do that, then you can get that nose looking much narrower, the face looking more oval. She lives in Toronto now. It's a long ways from Calgary, but she comes back once a year and have me treat her masseters and treat her nose and a few little things. So that's repeated over 6 years, and then that masseter mandibular stimulation concept is a really important one to understand. That's why you do the maintenance as you maintain these faces. So this girl is probably one of the most popular Asian models. She's Hunan. She's Mandarin, so she has a Mandarin look. She doesn't look Cantonese at all. She's Mandarin. So she has more the 1-to-1 ratio of lips. You're not trying to do 1 to 1.618. And Arthur's been teaching this all over the world, that whole concept, that the difference in that ratio of lips, the difference where you do that mid-face protrusion we'll talk about, that's more important in Asian patients. And there's another famous model from Shanghai that's also 1-to-1 ratio of her lips. And still, when you measure it from her epicantral fold there down, then you can get that same measurements there. So this is one of my patients that's now 49. She's an ER nurse. And if you look, most of her retrusion has happened in her central face, as Arthur was trying to help you understand, that central face retrusion. So if you put her apex too far up and out, you'll actually make her look wider, because the bitemporal and the bizygomatic and the bigonial width in these patients is different than Caucasians. So you have to match not only what, I'm not trying to make her look 21, but I want to make her look the best at 49. So you have to understand where you put that apex is a little different. It would be a little higher, and then you focus on that medial part. So she's obviously Vietnamese. She better be a Vietnamese. She looks Vietnamese. So she's 62. So if you look at her photo when she's 24, this patient immediately knew why she needed to do her whole face rather than just looking at her eyebrows and her eyelids. So if you look at her whole concept of this whole retrusion of the face, and the osteocutaneous ligaments that we've sort of ignored as dermatologists, plastic surgeons know about them very extensively because of their facelifts. But because we use needles for all these years, they have not been distracting. But the osteocutaneous ligaments help keep the face structure, and there's quite a few of them in the face that you need to know about. And now we use cannulas. Sometimes they're sort of like speed bumps. You run into them. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through the day here a little bit too. So these are all my patients. I have lots of Korean patients, lots of Japanese, Filipinos, lots of Mandarin, South Vietnamese, and they all have unique features that you should be able to point out immediately what those features are. But they have that central face protrusion. If you see those green stars there, that's the biggest feature you have to understand. And it's also a no-fly zone unless you understand where you put the needles and syringes and cannulas as well. We'll talk about that as well. And as Michael Caine, as Arthur was alluded to, taught us this years ago, that lateral canthus really is an issue with beauty. Your eye doesn't like it, and you don't know why until you start lifting it up a bit. It should be about 5 to 10 degrees above the medial one, and you can actually do that with fillers. And that's where the personality of the fillers come into play. I had several people talk to me this morning, well, why do you use this filler over that? Well, it depends what you're trying to accomplish, because they all have different personalities. Their cohesiveness, stickiness, plasticity, elasticity, blendability, all those things we'll talk about. So all those things, as you measure them out, become important. So these two girls have been friends since they were 10. So one girl is a maintenance girl, and the other girl is not maintenance. So maintenance becomes really important. One girl has done nothing, and the other girl has done maintenance. So that's what this maintenance is all about, is this whole concept we talked about maturing gracefully. So what we've learned is repeat injections are like a sleight of hand. So what I'm trying to do with my patients is in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, once we get them looking good, is then usually they say, well, my friend says, oh, you always look the same. You always look the same. So we're trying to not make them look older or not younger. We're trying with a sleight of hand with maintenance to make them look about the same. So it sounds ridiculous that we can make them look the same by doing little things. So we'll talk more about that through the day, through the next 2 days as well. So there's at least 15 ways to make change I used to say make change for $1, right, Arthur? And now we don't have any cents in Canada. We have no cents at all. We have no pennies. So making change for $1 is about 215 ways to make change for $1. There's about 15 ways to tie your shoes. So there's lots of ways to do the consult. So what Arthur and I started talking about quite a few years ago is Cesar Millan, you may know his story a little bit, lived in a one-room house with his grandparents, didn't speak any English, arrived in San Diego area with $100 that his grandfather gave him and declared he's going to become the world's best dog trainer. Well, how does he take a pit bull that's going to bite your leg off and in a short time licking his hand? So it's all done by calm, focused, assertive energy. Because words are psychoactive. It's just like I have a solicitor in room 4. My nurse says, don't mention Botox or fillers. She doesn't want to hear about that. And you go in and she's pacing the floor with a BlackBerry in one hand and an iPhone in the other hand. And I used to train horses. Come from a horsey family, and horses and dogs can tell your uncertainty. So it's all about calm, focused, assertive energy. So that's how I approach my patients. Now, in every country in the world, getting to yes is the same sort of scenario with your consults. And the prevailing schema in most clinics is like this, that most derms are on the clock, for instance, and most things I do are more serendipitous, is just after you get to know the patient and you get to know really why they want to look better, then they'll almost let you do anything. I'm amazed at how patients that come in aren't going to spend anything and leave spending $5,000. So it's just because of their desire to look better, not just because their husband left for a younger person and they have all these issues and said, Betty, you just look beautiful. I love the way you are, and marries a 20-year-old girl who looks beautiful, and it's just there's lots of issues with it. So that's that part. So we can certainly have questions here at this stage, but there may not be a lot of questions at this stage. So, Bob, we might want to...
I wanted to know if you'd like to actually...
There's a few questions there.
Oh, there? Yeah. Allocate time. How do you allocate time for the consult?
The way I do it is I have 5 nurses, and my nurses meet the patient first. So they find out why the patient's there and what the patient wants to do, and then and they usually have 30 minutes for that patient. And sometimes it takes less time, sometimes longer. And then I come in after that and start discussing with the patient what I think needs to be done. And every patient, so timing is a little bit of an issue. It depends on what we're trying to accomplish. But every patient gets a photo. And the patients who decline having a photo, I don't treat them. So they have to have baseline photos, 10 photos. I have a camera room. And we are very, very persistent with our photos. Even if the patient doesn't want treatment, we still take their photo. Because what I do is in 6 months, if that patient hasn't done anything, I'll send them a letter with their photo. The photo usually isn't very flattering, and saying you were here, this is what we talked about, if you'd like to come back. And sometimes the patient comes back with that picture I sent them, I'll kind of fold it up and say, I'm ready to start. Because they looked at their photo. But the timing has to be individual. But my nurses do a lot of, my nurses are amazing. Usually not. If I start something, it'll start something that's really positive. So I'll usually try to start something that'll get a really good result. So most of my patients are full face restorations, so I'm very reluctant to do selective focus. So no, I don't usually start them. I usually discuss everything, take their photos, show them similar patients, what we're going to do, and then we outline a project for them. Because most of the time, it's literally like restoring a painting. They take several steps, and we'll go through those steps that I do to create that. Once you create the look the patients want, it's like your patients. They usually say, well, I don't want Botox because I have to repeat it every 4 months. And I usually say, well, patients usually request they have it every 4 months. So once you get good results with filler or neuromodulator, patients don't usually ask. They usually say, what can I do next? But I do usually start, if I start that day, I'll start with something that's very obvious. And it's usually mid-cheek or eyebrows. I do a lot of eyebrows on the spot because patients often realize their eyebrows are flat. And the woman that has painting her lipstick above and below the lip line, their brain's telling them that they need to look better. Even sometimes they don't even know where they're doing that. So because sometimes, I don't usually start with the lips because sometimes you get a little swelling. So I'll start with eyebrows. You don't usually swell at all. So that's one of my favorite areas to start. But it depends on the scenario.
Did you want to comment?
Yeah. I'm on. Great. Okay. Kent's a master of the consultation process. I mean, he breaks it down and understands the personality and everything behind his patient. And it's the ideal way to do it. What I've noticed how it's evolved in my practice, and I've learned so much from him, I can't tell you, is the fact that it's a little story again. The whole caliper idea, and I'm not here to push calipers at all, but it's just to give you the idea of the concept, to understand that you can use anything in your practice. But the whole idea of measuring in calipers came about because of the fact that in my practice I was seeing patients walk in that, to me, it said that the physician who was treating them had no aesthetic sense. I was seeing these huge cheeks and these oversized lips, and I said, wow, there's a problem here. Now, the best pearl I can give you for your practice, this will all tie it in, is what is the one question that your receptionist should ask of the patient when they call for a consultation? They call up and say, hi, I hear Dr. Remington does the stuff with faces and injections. I'd like to have an appointment. What is the one question that you have to ask? At the level of the receptionist. Have you ever been injected before?
And with what?
Exactly. This is a question that has to be asked at the level of the phone. Why? You don't know what's going to walk into your office. If a patient says, no, I've never had injections before, then my secretary will say, well, we have an opening on such a day. Maybe you'd like to come in at that time. If the patient says, yeah, actually, I had some injections done. I had them done about 3-4 weeks ago, but I'm not too happy. I don't think my lips are big enough, or I don't think that they got the result that I want. Which appointment does that patient get? The last one of the morning or the last one of the afternoon? Point in fact. Forgot to ask that question at my front desk. Patient came into the office, 10 o'clock. Oh, yes, we have a cancellation. Why don't you come in at 10 o'clock this Tuesday? And a porn star walked into my office. Now, I have nothing against porn stars, don't get me wrong, but the more out there they are, the more marketable they are. And she walked in, besides the fact that she had huge implants, she walked in, I couldn't see her nose. Her lips had been inflated over her nose. And she sat down, and as I typically am anything but swift, I was running behind. And she sat down into a full reception area. What do you think happened? Within 30 seconds, one patient popped up, walked over to my reception, said, I forgot to put money in the meter outside. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Never came back. Another one popped up and said, I have to use my cell phone. I don't want to disturb people over here. I'm going to use it outside. Never came back. In 5 minutes, my reception area was decimated. Why? They thought I did that. When you become very proficient or you become a tertiary referral center, what's going to end up happening is things are going to walk into your office that are going to set you apart. The complications are going to walk in. I've seen patients with palate necrosis, nasal necrosis, forehead necrosis. You have to ask questions on the phone before they walk in or they will decimate your practice. The patients that left to go put money in the meter that never came back to see me never had the opportunity to be dazzled by my amazing personality. Never had the opportunity for me to lay my hands on them, but they were bad-mouthing me right off the bat. They said, don't go see Swift. You should see what walked into his office. He does these bizarre things. I was guilty beforehand. So that's a great thing to do. But here we go. Here's the idea. I'm walking down the street at lunchtime because I'm in the downtown core of Montreal. We have beautiful little restaurants. I'm walking back. I'm a terrible eater. I'm always getting dirty. The girls keep a bib for me when I'm at the office. But I go out, and now I'm walking back, and let's say I have a little mustard hanging from my lip and some crumbs on my collar. And I pass a woman in the street, though. I don't know who she is. 5 minutes later, she's sitting in the chair in my examining room, and I walk in all nice and spiffy with my white lab coat, and she recognizes me. And she says, oh, my God. This is the guy that couldn't put a fork in his mouth, and he's going to stick a needle in my face. Do you think she's nervous? Terrified. Absolutely terrified. And she's thinking, oh my God, toxin, pain, fillers. What am I headed for? And this is where Kent and I go and make a right turn on these patients where they don't expect it. And I'll ask her, hi, I'm Dr. Swift. How are you? Pleasure to meet you. How can I help you? Are there any areas, like Kent says, are there any areas of concern? What do patients focus on? Lines. She'll say to me, fill my folds. It's like hypnosis. Fill my folds. Fill my folds. I hear this all day long. I'm walking around like, okay, I got to fill some more folds. Why do people concentrate on the lines of their face? Because, as Kent was mentioning, we only see ourselves in 2 dimensions. You never see yourself in 3D unless, like Steve Fagan, you have an identical twin. Think about it. A selfie, 2D. Computer screens, whatever, 2D. Photo, 2D. Mirror, 2D. 2 dimensions is lines, length and height. But we see everybody else in 3D. Everybody. You see somebody else in contours, in shadows, like Kent was saying. You need the shadows to have the highlights. You need the highlights to have the shadows. We see contours, and you have a patient who's coming in who's only focused on 2D, and you have to convert them to 3D. How do you do that? Here's the master. How did I do that? I got these calipers designed to be able to teach physicians where to stop, but I started taking up my calipers. Patients said, fill my folds, fill my folds. And I would look at them, and this takes 2 minutes. You're talking about time conservation. This takes 2 minutes. This is the only consultation in my practice, the only consultation in my plastic surgical practice where I allow somebody else to sit in the consultation room. They're sitting on a little ottoman. My patient's sitting on the chair over here. She sits down. You can see by her shoulders that she's pushing herself away to try to keep distance away from the guy who couldn't get a fork in his mouth. And she's nervous about everything, and she says, fill my folds. And I say, yeah, I can, but, I'm a student of beauty as a plastic surgeon, as an aesthetic physician, as an aesthetic dermatologist. I'm a student of beauty, and I love to study beauty. Can I study your face? You got to look like this. said, listen, I'm a firm believer in the ideas of beautiful proportion. I like the Da Vinci concept of that. I have a set of calipers over here very similar to the ones that Da Vinci used. And I think there are certain aspects of your face. Every face has an inherent beauty in it. I think there are certain beautiful features of your face I would love to record in my chart. Do you mind if I take out these calipers and measure your face, just like Da Vinci did with the beautiful models that he worked with? What woman says no? It's the only time I've never been refused by a woman. Actually, I haven't been refused by men either. But anyways. So, out come the calipers. I explained to them, I'm going to measure the distance between your eyes, and as often as I see this distance over here and this distance over here will tell me how beautiful you are. And I start to measure. What do you think the friend is doing? She's straining around my body to see how does her friend measure up, because the question that's going to come out of her friend's mouth is, measure me. Now I have 2 consults all of a sudden. And I do the measurements just like Kent does. I do the measurements. And I say, wow, look, your forehead's perfect height, your eyebrows are great, oh, your cheeks are off a little bit, they're not exactly the way they should be for the proportion, and your chin is fine and everything. Okay, let me get to filling your folds. 76% of the time, I monitor this in my patients. I'm getting better now. 3 out of every 4 times, the patient will say, wait a second, you told me I'm perfectly proportioned here, but I'm short on my cheeks. Is there anything you can do about that? Wow. I haven't sold the patient anything. I haven't discussed anything and said, you got to do your cheeks and trying to force her to do her cheeks. She's now asking me for what she needs. It gives me the opportunity to explain as I'm doing that. Natural aging process. You're going to lose the fat in your cheeks and things are going to drop a little bit. That's why it's happening. This is the disease. The symptom is the fold. The disease is in the cheek. And they understand it. And another thing happened. I saw that the shoulders of the patient went like this. Relaxed. Why? Did I mention toxin once? Did I mention needles or pain once? Where's the anxiety in talking about mathematics? 0. Where's the anxiety in talking about beauty? 0. And I'll tell you something else. If you're a female injector, you're way ahead of me because women know more about beauty than men will ever know. Ever. And so for a female injector, it's like she's out for lunch with a friend of hers and they're discussing beauty things. For my patient who's female, she's looking and saying, this guy's discussing beauty with me. I know more about beauty than he does, and the talk isn't me talking down, it's the experience of the whole process, relaxed and asking me to do things. And then, as far as time conservation goes, if the patient says, I want you to do that face thing, I want you to fill it in here and here because I understand it now, I see it. If I have the time, I'll do it. If not, they're rebooked, and the friend walks out and says, I want to get the same thing done. And if the patient says, I don't have the budget for whatever reason, I never understood that word because my wife doesn't allow us to use it in our house. Okay, but the B word, the budget word, if that's, patients say, I have a budget, 1 syringe, and as they walk out, okay, I'll take 2 of those creams and 3 of those, I want some of that. What happened to the budget? But if they say, I still would like to do the folds, but I want to consider about it, then I do their folds. I'll do that for them, explain to them it's not going to be the ideal result. Those are the patients that will complain. The ones that you fill a line on, and pay a couple $100 or whatever the story is, are the ones that come back and bitch at you. The ones that spend a couple of $1,000 or whatever your market price is going to be, and we'll talk about how you can cost these things because people say you can't afford it in today's economy. Bull. That is the biggest bull I've ever heard. Do you agree?
I agree 100%.
As Kent has taught me for ages, he says, looking good never goes out of style, even in a disruptive economy.
Yeah.
You take a look at the sale of lipstick. You're talking about commodities. You take a look at the sale of lipstick during the Second World War, shot through the roof. Why? Because people didn't have time to go through major surgeries. Take a look at the sale of botulinum toxin, Botox, specifically in Lebanon during the Civil War. 4 times normal. I imagine these women running through craters of bombs to try to get to their doctors to get their Botox done. People always want to look good. The problem and the reason why we're not concentrating more on full faces is because we're thinking out of the patient's wallet, and that's a mistake. You'll never reach for the second syringe if you think it's going to cost them X amount per syringe. That's the wrong way to look at this. So the whole concept is that the way that you can get to do these things is make it affordable. You're the problem.
So generally what I do, and Arthur started these calipers, these are just a little smaller than Arthur's original ones. And essentially, you start in the intercanthal distance. And I don't know if that photographs well, but just the intercanthal distance is pretty easy to measure. But that's the basic measurement there. And I usually screw that down so it stays pretty good. So that's 1. Everything else is based on that. And then the distance between the brows should be that intercanthal distance here. So in her case, that distance is perfect. And that brow measurement should be, the inner part of the brow should be the intercanthus here. And then the length of the brow should be the phi of the intercanthal distance from the medial parts out here. And her length of her brow is right on. And the length of that brow should be the height of the forehead. Try to do this a little bit so you can see. And that is either not good or bad. That just happens to be right on for her. So do you wear your hair up or down?
Both.
Yeah, both. It won't matter because her brain tells her that it doesn't really matter. So in patients that have that high brow and they're wearing their hair all the way back, and your eye just doesn't like it. Those that have that really low brow, then there's little designer ways you can design that. Now, I have a makeup artist in my clinic that comes quite often and spends a day. One of the reasons I have a makeup artist is to show patients, and I'll show you with some patients later that I've done and taken their photos immediately after. So patients can go right back to work after they spend a day in my clinic doing their forehead, brows, lips, everything, go right back to work. And they just put their makeup on and they can go back to work. So that length of the eyebrow should be the length of her nose from the supratarsal fold here, and her nose is pretty well bang on here. And then the apex, her apex is generally, you can measure different ways, but it's also from the intercanthal distance in a 45-degree angle here out. So her apex just needs to be a little bit lifting here, just a little tiny bit. And then the length of the brow should be the width of her lips and the width of her maximum width of that chin. And then also that distance between the intercanthal distance should be also the width of the nose and the maximum volume of the lower lip. And we actually draw that, my nurses actually draw that out so we don't cheat and try to get it too far laterally. So we'll draw that out. Now, anything else, Arthur? You can measure?
Yeah, I mean, you can really get detailed with this if you want to play around with it. But those are the major measurements. Just like Kent does, what I do, exactly the same thing, is the first thing I ask the patient is, do you like to wear your hair back or forth? Back, up or down? And when the patient says, I like to wear it down to cover my forehead, then I show them why right off the bat, because I could see whether the forehead's too low or too high automatically. I mean, the one thing about this idea of using calipers is the fact that what it does is it transposes from here in here.
Yes.
I couldn't see it at the beginning. I came through music. I was supposed to be very artistic, and I still couldn't understand why I was getting good results and not such great results on other ones. And so I started using the calipers, and then I started noticing that it was training my eye to see the 5 proportions, which some people have naturally. When I would say to Ken, send me those beautiful pictures and results that you have, I would measure them. They were bang on. So he had it already from his artistic sense in his head. I had to study art. I had to study a lot of things to understand how to use them.
But you also, that's why we draw as well, is it patterns your brain?
Yeah. It does pattern your brain. Not only does it pattern your brain, but this and a pencil that you can remove, by the way, we're going to draw on some patients afterwards, are confidence tools. Patient walks in holding a brochure, maybe that has the picture of one of Ken's beautiful results. Patient says to me, wow, look at these results on this thing. Can you do that? I said, yeah. Did you do the one in the picture here? Even if I did, if it's the one on the brochure, I wouldn't admit it. I said, no, I didn't do that. Well, how do I know that you're going to be able to duplicate the result that this other doctor did? Because I'm going to measure you. Oh, there's a way to measure? Whew. I can hear the relaxation, the confidence. It gives the physician confidence and the patient confidence that there's an end point, that you're not going to because that's all they're concentrating on, is they're worried about the overinflation and the huge lips. It also adds confidence if a patient comes back and is trying to force you to do something that you don't think is aesthetically appropriate, you show them. I can't tell you how many women come back and say, it's typical. You do a breast augmentation, they're not going to complain afterwards their breasts are too small. Oh, I could have gone bigger. Here we go again. Same thing with lips. You do the lips to proportion. They come back. They say, I think my lips should be bigger. Out come my calipers. I say, no, look, you're bang on. You're perfect. Oh, okay, thanks. It helps you on that type of thing. So the other type of measurements that you can do is Always the first measurement is the intercanthal, just like Kent mentioned. And now I just don't get too complicated with the patient. I just say, as many times as I see this, and I see this measurement on your face tells me how beautiful you are. So I can tell that her eyebrow is exactly where it should be. Her eyebrow is where, her peak is where it should be. The height of her forehead is where it should be. Like Kent was showing you that the width of the nose. And we can do things with fillers to narrow nasal width, which we'll maybe get a chance to show you. The height of the length of her nose, as Kent was mentioning before. In a female, from lash line, when her eyes are open, to the base of the nose. In a male, from the tarsal fold. If you want to masculinize the nose on a female, bring it up a little higher. I wouldn't want to do that. Okay? Width of the mouth, great. In female chins, we like it around 1. If it gets to be a little bit too wide, or like around 1.618, that's a more masculine look. And then we look at 3 dimensions. We look at height. And a beautiful height, look how, let me turn her on a profile here if we can. And a beautiful height is from the upper lip to the bottom of the chin. She's bang on.
Yep.
Okay? You can see she's 1.618 this way. But if she was short here, I'd be putting filler in underneath to give her more height. Then you look at projection. You always assess the patient from every different angle because that's how their friends and family see them. I'll even go behind them and tilt up their chin when I'm doing injections and assessing how I'm doing the stuff, because it's about projection, how they project. Because if she's sitting down and having dinner and her friend walks by and sees one cheek forward and one cheek back, she'll say, what happened? So it's from all over the place. So we'll go through with our injections this afternoon of all these little things. You can do the phi of the lip. You can do the length of the upper lip to where the philtral column should be. It's fun, but I'm telling you that 95% of you have it in here already. It's just being able to explain what you want to do to the patient. That's where this comes in.
Now let me show you. This is what I never take out of my site as well, is this obtuse angled protractor. So in measuring noses in women, it should be 95 to 110 degrees, and hers is 100 degrees right on. So a lot of times with time and gravity and the depressor septi muscle, it pulls down. When patients are talking and eating, you'll see this pull down if the depressor septi is working over time a little bit. So that's done. You can probably show how we maybe do some today of lifting that nasal angle.
Sure.
But her nasolabial angle is right at 100 degrees. So this one we had designed as well, so that's available.
Let's get the camera to focus in on her face. I want to ask you questions. You know, we used to talk about eyebrows back in 2003. Then we said the cheek was the new eyebrow.
Yeah.
Then the chin was the new cheek.
Right.
Now we're back to eyebrows again.
Yeah.
We're going in circles, buddy. What do you think of her eyebrows, guys? Let me hear. Too high. Most people, as they age, we were always taught that people get brow ptosis. Most people, as you age, the eyebrows go up. When you understand what happens to the skeleton, the facial skeleton, as we age, what happens is that the supromedial area of the brow and the infralateral area of the brow open up. I'll show you that maybe after the break very quickly on an aging skull. And a lot of people, their eyebrows will go up. If you want to know what a good distance is for a starting point for an eyebrow, you reverse the calipers and you just do the measurement between the eyes this way. This is now 1, this is now 0.618. And if we take a look, you can see that her eyebrow is sitting up too high from her medial canthus. Ideally, she should be more like this and like that.
Yep.
You got to be careful now, because it all depends on what's happening in the medial canthal area. You know that you can drop brows because you accidentally do it sometimes when you're putting in toxin. Toxin for the glabella is not to eradicate lines. That's thinking in 1992. Toxin for the glabella is to make a beautiful glabella. And a beautiful glabella without lines that looks like this is not a beautiful glabella. And a beautiful glabella that looks like this is not a beautiful glabella either without lines. Or one that's splayed. So you adjust your toxin injections to get the height of the brow over there. And that height should be 0.618. If the patient has some volume loss, which they usually do, on the inside of the medial canthus, you can take up the extra skin that drops down when you drop that brow. It won't be a hooded look. But if they're tight over there already and you drop that brow, look out. They're going to come back and say, I look too tired or too heavy. So we'll talk about that when we get into the treatment areas.
Okay.
But there's all these different nuances that we'll share.
All I know is there's going to be no living with her now.
it.